All right, class. Today we are diving right into one of the most foundational, and let's be honest, famously dense chapters of Marx's Capital. We're going to unpack the core mechanics of how surplus value is created, and more importantly, how its magnitude can be stretched and pulled. A lot of people find Marx's language pretty intimidating. And as the economist Akil Loria points out here, that's not a new problem. Marx was, in a very real sense, minting a new language because he felt he was describing economic forces that no one had properly named before. But our job in this explainer is to cut right through that jargon. Because behind the terminology, there is a really elegant, powerful analytical engine at work. And our goal is to see exactly how it runs, with precision and with clarity. So here's our game plan. First, we'll quickly review Marx's basic analytical toolkit. Then, we're going to look at the three main levers, as we'll call them, for changing surplus value: the length of the workday, the intensity of that work, and its productivity. And finally, we'll bring it all together to see how they interact in the real world. Okay, first up, Marx's analytical toolkit. Before we can really get into how surplus value changes, we have to be absolutely solid on the core concepts we're working with. First, let's recall the value of labor power. This isn't just some arbitrary wage, right? For Marx, its value is determined by the value of everything a worker needs to stay alive and be able to show up for work the next day. Their food, their shelter, their clothing. It's the cost of maintaining and reproducing the worker. And that brings us to what is really the absolute pivot for this whole analysis: the division of the working day. A part of the day is necessary labor. That's the time the worker spends basically earning their own keep. But the rest of the day is surplus labor. This is the unpaid work that creates surplus value for the capitalist. The fundamental conflict, then, is a tug of war over the ratio between these two parts. So the big question is, how does that ratio change? To figure this out, Marx does what any good scientist or analyst would do. He isolates his variables. He looks at three key factors, what we're calling levers, one at a time, holding the other two constant to see the pure effect of each one. Section 2. Let's grab that first and most straightforward lever, simply extending the length of the working day. The profit that comes from this is what Marx calls absolute surplus value. So for this thought experiment, we have to imagine that nothing else is changing. The pace of work is the same, the technology is the same. The only thing we are tweaking here is the clock, the total number of hours worked. And the effect is, well, pretty obvious when you lay it out. If the necessary labor time is fixed at 6 hours, the time it takes to earn a wage, then every single hour tacked on to the end of the day is pure surplus labor time. Going from a 12-hour day to a 14-hour day doesn't change the necessary labor. It just adds 2 full hours directly to the capitalist's column. But, and this is a critical point for Marx, there are limits. If you stretch the day too far, you get to a point of diminishing returns, and worse, the wear and tear on the worker becomes so great that the capitalist is no longer just using the labor power they paid for, they are prematurely destroying it. They're consuming the very source of future value. Okay, section 3. So what happens if you can't lengthen the day anymore? Maybe there are laws against it, or workers are just at their physical limit. Well, the next lever to pull is to make the workday denser by cranking up the intensity of the labor. Now, it is absolutely crucial that we distinguish intensity from productivity. Intensity isn't about better technology. It's about increasing the sheer expenditure of physical and mental effort within a given hour. It means working harder, faster, with fewer pauses. You're cramming more labor into the same bucket of time. So by increasing the intensity, the capitalist gets more total value out of the worker. A really intense 12-hour day might produce the same amount of value, and therefore surplus value, as a less intense 14-hour day. It's a way of achieving the same result as lengthening the workday, just without touching the clock. And for Marx, that's exactly what it is, a disguised method of lengthening the workday. It extracts more total labor from the worker, but it does so qualitatively, not quantitatively. It's a change in the density of work that has a direct effect on the amount of surplus value produced. Okay. On to our third lever, productivity. Now, this one is arguably the most significant for understanding modern capitalism, and it's the foundation for what Marx famously calls relative surplus value. So what is productivity? This is where new machinery, new technology, and better organization of the factory floor come into play. The key here is that the same amount of labor in the same amount of time now produces more stuff. Workers aren't necessarily working harder, they're just working more effectively. Now, here's the really brilliant move. If productivity rises in the industries that make the things workers buy to live, food, clothes, and so on, then the value of those goods falls. And if the value of their necessities falls, then the value of labor power itself falls. It simply takes less time for the worker to produce the value equivalent to their wage. So the total workday hasn't budged. It's still 12 hours. But that internal dividing line has shifted. Necessary labor shrinks from, say, 6 hours down to 4, and those 2 hours are automatically converted into surplus labor. That is the core mechanism of relative surplus value, cheapening commodities in order to cheapen the worker. All right, final section. We've taken these levers one by one for the sake of clarity, just as Marx does. But of course, in the real world, things are a lot messier. All of these levers are being pulled at once, often in competing directions. Think about it. Workers might successfully campaign for a shorter workday, but in response, management might install new surveillance tech to increase the intensity of labor. Or a new machine increases productivity, but it also leads to layoffs, which increases the competitive pressure on the workers who are left. It's a constant push and pull. And this table really brings that complexity to life. Just look at the top row. Say the workday gets shorter. That's a win for labor. It decreases surplus value. But if management responds by jacking up both the intensity and the productivity, those forces increase surplus value. So what's the final outcome? It's indeterminate, as Marx says. It becomes a battle of magnitudes, a question of which force is stronger. And ultimately, this is the key takeaway. Understanding these 3 levers, the length of work, the density of work, and the effectiveness of work, is to understand the fundamental pressures and points of conflict that shape the entire capitalist labor process. This 19th century framework gives us a really powerful lens for the present day. So I'll leave you with this question. How do we see these exact same levers, productivity through automation, intensity through performance tracking, and the workday through the modern blur of salaried flexibility, how do we see them at play in our own working lives today? Thank you.